All of God's people said. Please stay standing for the reading of God's word. We're going to read a passage from the book of Isaiah. It's chapter 41, verse 10. Don't be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand. You can be seated. So I really like that verse. God reminds us that He is our strength. He is our help. He goes to battle for us every day. And He reminds us not to be afraid. There's actually 366 times in the Bible where He tells us not to be afraid. It's one for every day of the year, plus one. Think He's trying to make a point? Fear is a topic I want to talk about today. How it holds us back, how it discourages us, keeps us from answering God's call in our lives, keeps us from serving Him as fully as we could. And we make up lots of excuses about why we hold back, why we can't do certain things, why we think this action or that action won't work. And that leads us to feeling anxious and uncertain and hopeless. Anytime we're trying to take steps to make positive change in our life, to follow Jesus more closely, or to learn and grow in a certain area, the devil comes at us. Fear is the biggest weapon that the enemy uses. He watches you. He studies you. He knows what makes you tick. He figures out what your deepest, darkest fears are. And then when he sees you trying to take steps to live for God, that's when he comes after you. And he's subtle about it. He whispers in your ear. He'll tell you, you're not good enough. You're not worthy. You're never going to make it. Causes you to want to give up. And then when you do, he steps back and just laughs at you and says, see, told you you were worthless. So how do we battle against those feelings that he brings? Well, the obvious answer is we turn to God, and that's the right answer, but it doesn't always seem so easy. Today I wanted to look at some people in the Bible who struggled with fear themselves, and I want to look at how they dealt with it, what God tells us in Scripture, that the ways that he wants us to respond to the fears that we face today, because they're the same types of fears that people have been experiencing since the beginning of time. So the first one I want to look at is fear of failure. This is the big one. This is when, like I said, we're taking steps to bring positive change to our life. We're trying to live for God more fully. We're trying to be better, to grow in some way, and the devil starts whispering at you, it's not going to work. You're going to look stupid. Everyone's going to laugh at you. You're not qualified, so you may as well not even try. But the truth is, you don't fail until you stop trying. When God called Moses to go see the Pharaoh, he wanted him to deliver a message. Moses dealt with fear of failure. He got scared. In chapter 4, verse 4, it says that Moses protested, what if they don't believe me? What if they don't listen to me? What if they say, the Lord never appeared to you? A few verses later in verse 10, it says, Moses pleaded with the Lord, oh Lord, I'm not very good with words. I never have been, and I'm not now, even though you have spoken to me. He said, I get tongue-tied. My words get tangled. All he could focus on was his own shortcomings and all the reasons why he thought he wouldn't be able to do this thing that God wanted him to do. And God ended up allowing for Moses' brother Aaron to be the spokesperson in the beginning there, to provide a way for Moses to still be obedient. And that's what God does. He likes to make a way when we don't see that there is one. And when we read through the rest of Exodus and then onto the next books of the Bible, we can see that over time, Moses became more confident, and he started to address the people directly. But he was obedient. He didn't give up. He didn't quit whenever he was afraid of failing. He moved forward like God wanted him to. We mess up sometimes. We're going to slip. We're going to stumble. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to have setbacks. The important thing is, do you learn from them? Proverbs 24:16 says, the godly may trip 7 times, but they get up again. So even when we trip and fall, we don't just stay down. We get up again. We keep moving forward. And we learn from those mistakes. Like I said, Proverbs 14:23 says, in all work there is profit. That one's kind of interesting because what exactly does that mean? In all work there is profit. Sometimes I do work that I don't get paid for if it's not part of my job. So where's the profit? Well, the Bible uses the word profit or profitable a lot when it's referring to basically anything that is considered a gain or something that's beneficial. It's not always monetary. If I'm doing work where I'm building something, maybe I've got a project going on at home, I'm building a garden or a flower bed or something like that, which my wife would tell you I would never do. But if I was to build something, then I'm putting in the work, and the end result, the thing that I get that I built, that could be considered the profit that I get from that work. Whenever I'm pursuing a goal, maybe I'll fall short, I don't quite get there, but the experience and knowledge that I gain along the way is going to help me be more capable of reaching the next goal that I set. Whenever I stumble into sin because I allowed myself to behave a certain way or get into a certain situation that made it easy for me to, I can learn from that experience. I can say, okay, what do I do differently in the future so I don't fall into that same place? We learn from our mistakes. So as long as we don't give up, you keep moving forward and you don't repeat the same mistakes and you learn from them, then you're never failing. We deal with fear of other people's opinions, and we all do, even if you think you don't. On some level, you still care about what other people think. And I don't know why we care so much about what other people think, but this is something that has been perpetuated even worse by the internet and social media. You know, we get so hung up on the amount of attention that we get by the things that we post online. If I put something on Facebook or on TikTok, it gets a lot of likes and attention, then I feel good about myself. And if it doesn't, then I feel bad, like as if somehow my self-worth is tied to the things that I post on the internet. And people can say some mean and nasty things sometimes on there. That's another thing that's happened in our society with people have the ability to say whatever they want to say to other people without any repercussions because they can just hide behind the keyboard or their phone screen. They never actually have to see the person face to face. And so they'll say things on the internet that they would never say to the person in real life. And sometimes words can hurt. That's the truth. And if it happens to be somebody that you're close to, they can hurt even worse. Sometimes the most hurtful things can come from the people we're closest to because you value their opinion. There are not many things that are more painful than someone you love tearing you down or making you feel like you're not good enough or that they don't believe in you. Sometimes when people get used to seeing you a certain way for so long, they have a hard time seeing you as anything else. And when you're trying to be better, when you're trying to live for Jesus, when you're trying to improve your life, when you're trying to get better in some area of your life, it's hard for them to see that change as a positive thing. Sometimes when people are used to seeing you a certain way and they see you start to change, it makes them uncomfortable because it shines a light on their lack of effort. And they don't like that. They want you to stay the same because that's what they're familiar with. In Mark chapter 6, verse 4, Jesus said, "A prophet is honored everywhere except in his own hometown and among his relatives and his own family." I'm not trying to say any of us are Jesus or that we're prophets, but when he said that, what he was talking about is in Nazareth, where he was from, where he grew up. The people there had always seen him as a certain way. Everything we know about him was really done in the last 3 years of his life when his ministry started, but prior to that, he lived a regular life. And these people in Nazareth had known him. They had probably grown up with him. A lot of them, when they were kids, they played with him. They saw him around town. They went to church with him. He lived down the street. And when they found out that he was going around proclaiming to be the Messiah, they were like, "What? He's saying that he's who? Like, that's just Joseph and Mary's son. He's not the Son of God." It's because they got so used to seeing him as a certain way that they couldn't see him as anything different. But Jesus never let any negativity throw him off track or get him off his mission. He kept moving forward. He kept proclaiming his message to the world. He kept discipling people. He kept leading people to salvation. And we see that eventually a lot of those people that doubted him in the beginning, a lot of them had changes of heart. A lot of them decided to start believing in him and following him. And so if you have people in your life that doubt you and are skeptical of the positive changes you're trying to make, don't respond to that with more negativity. Try to use it as motivation and as fuel to keep moving forward, to keep trusting God, to maybe be an inspiration to them to follow your lead. We fear change We don't like change. We like things to stay the way they are, what we're familiar with, what the routine is. Sometimes we'll even fight to keep things the way they are, even if the way they are isn't good or isn't good for us. We'd rather stay in a situation that's bad because it's what we know than to try to put in the work to make things better. You see that a lot with people who are in addiction. Unfortunately, I've had a lot of people really close to me, friends and family, who have wrecked their lives because of addiction. My dad died of cirrhosis of the liver from alcoholism. My mom, by the grace of God, has been sober for 3 years, but she's got all kinds of health problems that were brought on from years of alcoholism. I had an aunt who died from pancreatitis that was brought on through alcoholism. One of my sisters has battled with drugs and alcohol for a lot of years, and it's caused her to make a lot of bad choices to the point that she had her kids taken away from her. My cousin Chris died a few years ago from organ failure due to health problems that he had from years of alcoholism. He was my cousin, but he was really more like my brother because we grew up together in the same house. He came to live with our family when he was 8 years old. He lived with us until he was 18. He was like one of our siblings. And even though I was a couple of years older than him, I always looked up to him because, he was one of the popular kids. He always had a lot of friends. He always had a lot of girlfriends. He always got invited to all the parties, and he was the life of the party. Even when he wasn't drinking, it was just so funny. Like, you couldn't be around him for more than a few minutes without cracking up laughing about something he did or said. He was an amazing athlete. To watch him play basketball would blow your mind. When we were teenagers, I was convinced he was going to the NBA someday. And he was short like me, so it probably wouldn't have worked out, but I knew that this kid's going places. He had so much potential in him, but when he got into high school, he started to become more preoccupied with partying and chasing girls and getting drunk and getting high and living that kind of lifestyle than he was with doing his classwork. And he started failing. And he ended up dropping out of school. But he continued to live that lifestyle of going out partying all the time, getting drunk, getting high, hanging out with his friends, until eventually all of his friends started to grow up and start their lives. They went off to college. They started families. They got careers. But he was still stuck back here in that same old lifestyle. And he realized one day that he didn't really have anybody anymore. When he was about 20 years old, he moved down to Oklahoma where his parents lived because he never really got to be around them when he was a kid. And our grandparents lived down there too. It's this tiny little town outside of Tulsa. It's small. It's maybe only got a few thousand people that live there. It's not a whole lot of people there. So he didn't have anybody there either. And all he had to do was get drunk all the time. The last year of his life, I would talk to him pretty frequently on the phone. And he would always be telling me about this great new job opportunity he had coming up and how he was really going to get his life together now. He's making steps to get sober for once and for all, and things were going to be better. And it always sounded good, but it never worked out like that. We would talk about our faith. We would talk about things he was reading in the Bible, and he was working on having a relationship with Jesus. And I believe that he was saved, but that alcohol just had such a strong hold on him. He just continued to spiral worse and worse. About 6-7 years ago, his mom died, like I said, of pancreatitis from alcoholism. I had hoped that maybe that would spark some kind of change in him, but it didn't. If anything, it made him worse. He finally got to the point where he was a month or two away from being homeless because he wasn't paying his rent, couldn't keep a job. And it seemed like he had finally got to the point that he was ready to be serious about making some change. He even contacted a recovery facility here in Kansas City, made an appointment, set up an arrangement where they were holding a spot. They were holding a bed for him. And our family down there, our family up here, we kind of worked together to help him develop this plan where our grandpa was going to drive him into Tulsa to the bus station. He was going to bring a bus up here to Kansas City. I was going to go pick him up, take him directly to the facility where he was going to spend 90 days in there and get sober finally. And then our family up here was going to help him out with having a place to stay and getting a job and things like that. And when the day came that our grandpa took him to the bus station, he couldn't get out of the car. He was too scared. So our grandpa had to drive him all the way back home. That was a 2-hour round trip. And it took about a week before I could get him on the phone because he was too embarrassed to talk to me. And he apologized like, I don't know what happened. I just froze. I just got scared. But I still really want to do this. I'm going to give it another shot. And I was like, all right, man, let's do it. So we got our grandpa to drive him into Tulsa again to the bus station. And again, he froze and couldn't get out of the car. Grandpa wasn't too happy about that after that. My grandparents had long since stopped being willing to help him because any help they gave him, he found a way to turn it into alcohol. And so this was kind of the last straw for them. And Chris wouldn't answer my calls after that. I couldn't get him on the phone at all. I know he was just embarrassed and didn't want to talk about it. And I ended up just leaving him a voicemail where I said, man, I love you. We all do. We all want to help you, but nothing we do is going to make any difference until you're ready to get help. I said, whenever you decide you're ready, let me know. I'll be here. And it was maybe a month later that I found out he had been found in his apartment dead. We never really got a clear answer on the cause of death, but essentially it was organ failure. He had pancreatitis, he had liver problems, he had alcohol that just ravaged his body. And I was angry at him at first. I was like, man, you were so close. Why couldn't you just get on that bus? I had to lean on God a lot during that time. And what I came to realize, what I believe happened is when the reality set in for him of the amount of work he was going to have to do and the amount of discomfort he was going to have to face in getting sober, it was so overwhelming that he chose to just stay stuck in the misery that he was familiar with rather than put in the work to get better. I mean, he hated his life. He knew he needed to change, but the idea of change was scary to him. I think we can all do that sometimes, maybe not to that extent, but for some reason, we have this thing about us as humans where we won't change until the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing. And then we're like, okay, now I'll change. But if we can figure out how to not let it get to that point before we're willing to move forward, things will be so much better. Whenever Moses was leading the Israelites through the wilderness, and they hadn't been free from slavery for more than a few weeks, they started complaining about everything they could complain about. We don't have enough food, we don't have enough water, we don't have this, this sucks, this is uncomfortable. Like, they started wishing they could go back and be slaves again because that's what they were familiar with. And even though they absolutely hated that life, they felt like it would be better to go back to that than to put in this work we're going to have to do to be free. We fear the unknown. There's a lot of unknowns in life. When it comes to things like health crisis and like shifts in the economy, they can be scary because we don't know what's going to happen. Whenever we move to a new location or we change jobs, there's a lot of unknowns that come into play. But at least in my experience, a lot of times we end up realizing that what we were so scared of really wasn't that bad after all. In Genesis 12, God called Abraham to leave his home country, leave his family, his father's relatives, everything he had ever known, to go off into a land that God wanted to show him. And Abraham didn't know where he was going, what he was getting into. But the Bible is very clear that he was obedient to God. Luke, my brother-in-law who goes to church here, he and we're scout leaders for the BSA. And out at the summer camp where we take the scouts in the summertime in Osceola, they have this honor program it's based on Native American culture. And the program was developed between people of the scouting organization and actual Native Americans from the Arapaho Indian tribe. And so it's all on the up and up. There's no appropriation going on. It's all done in a very respectful way. And we pay a lot of honor to the culture of the Native Americans. And there's a tribe called the tribe of Mikisew that scouts are able to get inducted into when they demonstrate leadership qualities. And a couple of years ago, Luke and I as adults we had the privilege of becoming honorary warriors in the tribe. And part of that process involves choosing a tribal name. The name I chose was Bison Charging Thunder, which not only sounds cool, but there's some meaning behind it. And I was inspired by an article I had read about one of the differences between cattle and bison. A little known fact, there's actually no buffalo here in North America. The animal that a lot of people call a buffalo is actually a bison, which is a different animal. They're both part of the same species, the bovine species, along with cows. But buffalo live in other countries. Here in America, we have bison and we have cattle, we have cows. So the article I read was about the difference between the way cattle and bison react to a storm. So if you can imagine a group of cows just out in the pasture, grazing, chilling out, sunbathing, playing Uno, whatever they like to do for fun, and they see a storm come rolling in. They don't know what that is. It's this big, scary thing up in the sky, and they freak out. They take off running like they're being chased by an evil clown with a knife. But I don't know if you've ever seen a cow run. They're not very fast. and the storm catches right up to them. And so now they're just running along in the storm. It's raining, there's thunder, there's lightning, it's scary. They're really panicking now, but what can they do? They're stuck. They tried to run away from this thing that they were scared of, but now they're just stuck in it. Now, bison are a little smarter. When they see a storm coming in, they run directly at it because they know that if the storm's moving this way and we're running this way, we're going to pass right through it and come out the other side just fine. And they're probably going to be a little stronger for it, mentally and physically. And then the next time a storm's coming in, they're not going to be scared because they know how to handle it. They know what to do. Courage is not the absence of fear, but it's the willingness to move forward even when you're afraid. And you can't fake courage. If you're doing the thing you're scared of, you're being brave. That's why I chose that name, is Bison Charging Thunder. I want to be someone who faces my fears. That's something I'm continually working on with God's help. But when we constantly run and hide from our fears, we end up just stuck in them permanently. Now, before I mentioned that the proper response to fears is to turn to God, and that's what we should do. And you might wonder, does God really know what it feels like for me to be afraid? I mean, He's God. He's the creator of the universe. He's all-knowing, all-powerful, all-present. He's never afraid of anything. So does He really know what this feels like when I'm scared of something? Well, he does know because Jesus knows, and Jesus was God. So the Bible tells us that Jesus was God in the flesh. John chapter 1 says, the Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us. I was studying 1 Corinthians this morning. There's a passage in there where, in the Oxford translation of the Bible, it calls Jesus the icon of God. And I really thought that was cool because when I think of the word icon, I think of like something I see on my computer desktop or on my phone home screen. I've got all these icons on there. And the icons each represent a program or an app that's on the device. I can't see that program just looking at the home screen, but I can see the icon. That's the visual representation of that program. And Jesus was the visual representation of an invisible God. He came to earth to live as a man for 33 years, and He was fully God and fully man. But as a man, He experienced all of the feelings and emotions that we all face every day. And we can see that all throughout the Gospels. We see Him get hungry and thirsty. There's specific examples of him eating and drinking. We see Him get tired. He took naps. Sometimes he got peopled out and had to go off and be alone with God to recharge for a little while. He got angry when he found the temple turned into a marketplace. He started whipping people and flipping tables and yelling at them to get out. We saw Him get sad when his friend Lazarus died, when he saw the lack of faith of all the people around them. He was tempted to sin. For 40 days in the wilderness, it says the devil tempted Him to sin, but He resisted. He liked to have fun. He liked a good party. We see Him going to weddings and dinner parties. He enjoyed being around people and having a good time. He got embarrassed by his mom at the wedding in Cana. She went to him and said, hey, they ran out of wine, do something. And he said, my time hasn't come yet. And she just ignored him and looked at the servant and said, just do what he tells you. And he's like, well, I guess I am doing something. He dealt with betrayal. Judas, one of the original disciples, walked with Jesus for 3 years. Probably got very close. He's probably like a brother to him and to the other disciples. He ended up turning Jesus over to the Romans for 30 pieces of silver. You ever had somebody you really care about stab you in the back? Jesus did. And yes, he dealt with fear as well. Anytime you see a depiction of Jesus on the cross, whether it's in a painting or on a statue, I don't know why this is, but they've always got Jesus just looking ripped. Six-pack abs, looks like he's got like 3% body fat, never misses a day in the gym. Truth is, we don't really know what Jesus looked like. I mean, if I had to guess, I would say he was probably in decent shape just because of the lifestyle he had to live back then, like everyone did. It was a much more physical lifestyle. They didn't have the technology and things that we have today. Before he began his ministry, Jesus was a carpenter. Carpentry was hard. It's hard work now, but especially back then, there were no power tools, right? Everything was done by hand. Cutting down the tree, sawing it into wood planks, forming it into furniture or a house or whatever it was you were going to build. It was physically demanding work, so he was probably pretty strong. He definitely got his cardio in. When we look at When we look through the Gospels and we see all the specific examples where it says that he traveled from one town to another on foot, if we look at just the examples that it mentions in the Gospels, it adds up to about 3,000 miles that he walked over the course of those 3 years. And that was just the times we know about. So he was probably in fairly good shape physically, and he was a leader of men, right? He spent a lot of time with a group of guys, probably doing things guys do, making stupid jokes, maybe wrestling around with each other. I see him as a tough guy, right? A man's man. And on top of that, he was God, with all the power that comes along with that. So you might think, how could he have ever been afraid of anything? The night before his crucifixion, Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane with some of his disciples, and he knelt down to pray. In Luke 22, starting at verse 41, it says, he walked away about a stone's throw and knelt down to pray. Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine. Then an angel from heaven appeared and strengthened him. He prayed more fervently, and he was in such agony of spirit that his sweat fell to the ground like great drops of blood. He literally sweat blood. Hematohydrosis. It's a very rare medical condition, but it's a real thing. And it's seen in people who are facing extreme levels of stress or anxiety or fear. Their blood capillaries burst and seep into their sweat glands, and it actually comes out in their sweat. Jesus was there praying that night, and he was thinking about everything that was to come the next day. Now, he was going to have his beard ripped out. He was going to have a crown of thorns shoved onto his head. He was going to be knocked around, spit on, mocked and ridiculed. Those are just the mild things. He was going to be flogged. The instrument they used for that was this. It was basically a pole with strands of leather coming off of it, and each strand had pieces of bone or rock or glass woven into it, so that when they whipped you with it, those pieces of bone and rock would become embedded in your skin. And then they would rip it out, taking pieces of flesh right along with it, ripping your skin wide open. And they would do this all up and down your body. By the time they were done, you'd be laying there in a big heaping, bloody mess, your body ripped to shreds, pieces of muscle tissue and even bone exposed from the deep lacerations and ripped open skin. Most people died from this. But we know that Jesus was still alive when they finished doing this to him. And then they decided to crucify him, which meant that he had to carry this about 100-pound crossbeam over the distance of about 6.5 football fields up to the top of a hill where he would be crucified, and they would nail him on the cross. Now, if you don't know, the most common cause of death from crucifixion was suffocation, because they would put spikes through your wrist onto that crossbeam and position your body in a way where you would be hanging. And then they would take your feet and cross one over the other and put one spike through both of them into the bottom part of the cross, but they would bend your knees just a little bit. Because while you were hanging there, the pressure that was on your lungs was so great that you couldn't breathe, and so you would have to push up on that spike through your feet just in a semi-standing position so you could get a couple of breaths. And when that pain in your feet became too unbearable, you would sink back down and transfer some of that weight onto your wrist to try to get a little bit of relief, as if there could be any relief in that. And it was just this constant up and down motion, just trying desperately to breathe. And remember, his shredded back rubbing against that cross would have been so painful. People on the cross eventually would become so exhausted that they couldn't push up anymore, and they would suffocate and die. Sometimes, if a person was taking too long to die, they would go up and just bust their kneecaps so they couldn't push up anymore. And then they'd die a little bit faster. So that night before, when Jesus was in the garden praying, he was thinking about all of this that was to come. And he was fully God and fully man, and the God in him was ready to go, ready to do what needed to be done. It's showtime, let's go. But the human in him was terrified, so much so that he sweat blood, so much so that when he prayed, he asked God, hey, if there's a plan B, let's do that. But there wasn't, and he knew that there wasn't. That's why his very next line was, Father, your will be done and not mine. Jesus would have had the book of Isaiah memorized, and I wonder if while he was kneeling there praying, if this passage might have crossed his mind at all. where God says, don't be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand. When he finished praying, he stood up, ready to step into his destiny, ready to take on the weight of the sin of the entire world, ready to charge the storm that was coming at him. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to move forward even when you're afraid. Jesus is our example in all things. And in this, he's our example of how to face our fear. We turn to God. We trust him. We have faith that he's going to fight our battles for us, and then we face the things that are scary because we know he's on our side going into that battle for us. If you constantly run and hide from your fears, then you're just going to be stuck in those fears permanently. Jesus did what he did. He went through what he went through for us. He paid the debt that we owe. He suffered the punishment that we deserve. He gave us that gift so that we could spend eternity with him in heaven. So if you haven't yet made the decision to receive that gift, I invite you to do that today. Don't let another day go by without honoring Jesus' sacrifice. Living for him is not always easy, but I promise it's always worth it. Don't stay stuck where you are because you're afraid of change, because you're focused on all these fears that you think keep you from being capable of making positive change in your life, because he wants to help you make that change. And the change that he'll bring to your life is worth more than you can imagine. Let's pray. God, we thank you for loving us so much. Thank you for sending your son to take our place on that cross. Thank you for sending him to take that punishment that we deserve, God. Getting us off that horrible path that just leads to death and destruction. Thank you for giving us the strength to overcome our sin, to overcome our fears. God, let us never take for granted what was done for us on that cross. Let us honor it every day in the way we live, in the way we treat people, in the way we serve, in the way we lead people back to you. God, we love you more than we could ever express, and we know that we could never repay what you did for us, but we just want to make you the center of our lives. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. You're excused. Thank you.